Hello and good evening again, everyone. My name is Todd Lee. I am the director of the First Year Experience. I also teach in the English department, and thank you very much for coming this evening. We are very privileged to welcome Mr. Kevin Ryan, who is a CUA alum, graduated in 1989, and then went on to Georgetown Law, and is now the president and CEO of Covenant House. Kevin's going to speak a little bit about his life post-CUA, but also talk about his experiences as a CUA undergraduate, the ones that he's legally free to talk about anyway. Afterwards, Kevin and a co-author, Tina Kelly, over here, have written a book on some of the great work that Covenant House has done by helping young teens transfer from homelessness to hope. The books will be on sale just outside. The FYE is subsidizing them, so if you're interested, they'll be signing them for you. And then we also have free ice cream afterwards. That's for everybody. So that'll be outside on the patio here on the Priz, so please go outside and enjoy it. Hopefully it won't be raining. So we're going to see a short video, and then Kevin will come up and give you some information. But please join me in thanking Kevin ahead of time for Kevin.
Thanks for coming out tonight. You know, when I left Catholic University a long time ago, a lot more hair was thinner, I had a story about my life, and it was the story of the son of two parents who loved each other. We grew up in a middle-class, working-class family in New Jersey, 5 brothers, and it was a story of love. My mother, for all of my life, lied to me every Sunday morning and said to me, "You have a beautiful voice, sing out." I do not have a beautiful voice. But she convinced me that I did, and my dad would tell me at Little League games, "Get up here, you're going to hit a home run." I have never hit a double, let alone a home run, but he filled me with a sense of promise and purpose about my life, and so the tape that played in my mind in all of my time here at Catholic University, and then when I showed up at Covenant House in New York, was of self-esteem and confidence and a story of love and kindness. So Covenant House was a revolution, and in many ways a revelation. I showed up at 41st Street and 10th Avenue by the Lincoln Tunnel, and I did not know that there were kids who were prostituted at the ages of 13 and 14 until October of 1992, when I went into the Amtrak tunnels with our street outreach team and met a 13-year-old pregnant girl who had been prostituted down in the salt mines in Chelsea, in New York City, and was discarded when she became pregnant because she was no longer attractive to the Johns. I didn't know that there were kids with death sentences until Thanksgiving, that first Thanksgiving in 1992, when my then wife Claire, who I met here when we were undergrads, and I went to the shelter and celebrated Thanksgiving. There were 3 boys in the back of the room, and they were singing Boys to Men, which was a big group back then. And I already told you that I was up for a sing-along. I used to think I could sing. So I sat down with them and was listening to their songs, and then I realized that these were the songs the boys wanted played at their funerals, because all of these boys had been diagnosed with HIV, and one of them had full-blown AIDS. And while it's not true today that that's a death sentence for a teenager, it was true back then. They were all dead in 2 years. And their story was remarkably the same. All of them had come out to their families and had been pushed to the streets. They had all engaged in survival sex. They had all become infected, and they were all dead before they were 16. And I can't describe to you how unprepared I was for this experience. I can't tell you how crushed I was by it. And I began to have a solar eclipse. All the light and kindness that moved through my experience and created my narrative was quickly vanishing, and I found myself angry and filled with rage at the pimps and the Johns and the bullets and the bullies and the gangs, the guns, and the parents, drug-addled, in prison, who had put these kids in this situation. And slowly but surely, this idea of a providential God and the notion that grace could work through us and that we together could build a kingdom was lost to me. And I became a son of darkness and sure that I was going to split Covenant House in 2 years. I remembered, thankfully, an experience that I had here. So I showed up at Catholic University in 84, and it seems like a minute, right? That's so long ago. And I was not happy. I had a very tough first year and went home in February, thought for sure I would leave, and hadn't found that, you know, what they say, birds with feathers. I hadn't found my people. I hadn't found my community. It wasn't working for me. And I kept waiting for Catholic University to happen to me instead of me happening at Catholic University. I didn't feel comfortable in my skin. And, you know, for each of you, there's a different community that works for you. Some of you, it's your learning community. For some of you, it's campus ministry. For some of you, it's sports. Some of you might be like I was at the end of the first year, and you're still looking for your people in your community, and you're wondering if this makes sense for you. But what I kept hearing from all my friends from high school was how happy they were at all of these other universities, and when I visit them, there were frats, and there were parties, and everybody was having a good time, and I was lonely a Catholic, and I wasn't very happy. And I wish I had a more noble tale to tell you, that I could tell you that I decided to persevere, but it wasn't that, it was inertia. You know, I was just too lazy to figure out where else I would go, and so I bounced back here in my sophomore year. And I did get more intentional about thinking about getting proactive in my life and finding light and finding kindness, and I found my people. And eventually found my girlfriend, who's now my wife. No, this is a happy story for me. I'm not sure if it's a happy story for her, but it's a happy story for me. And you know, once I found community here, and this place made sense to me, so I had an algorithm about Catholic University and figured out who I was in this, you know, amazing ecosystem. Then I was more alive, and I was coming into my own. And then this community made sense to me. All that to say, sometimes intentionally, mostly unintentionally, I learned about perseverance and trying to be more kinetic about my life. Not, as I said, waiting for things to happen to me, but me getting engaged. And, you know, I failed a few times. I thought that, you know, one sports team would work for me, and then I thought another would, or I thought that, you know, Life at the Rat would work for me. It turned out that it was a trip to Appalachia, a service project, or, you know, in my experience, a kindness project that in many respects helped me figure out what I wanted to be here and the people who I would love here. And to this day, a lot of those people are the best friends of my life. Brian Cashman, who's the general manager of the New York Yankees, became one of my very best friends on that trip. And I promise you I had no idea he was going to be the general manager of the New York Yankees. Otherwise, I would have gotten to be his friend much sooner than I did. And Al Goff, who is, you know, one of the most successful screenwriters, created the television show Smallville, and you know, now has that really horrific new Sylvester Stallone movie. But before that, had Spider-Man 2, Lethal Weapon 4, and Lethal Weapon 5, and you know, a hit parade of credits. You know, he was another guy that I met on that trip. And I didn't, of course, know what their trajectories would be. I didn't know one of them would manage a franchise in Major League Baseball, and I didn't know the other would go on to become a successful Hollywood writer and producer. But I did know that they were deeply kind people, and that they, together, would forge for me a different and better way here. And they did, and they become my friends to this day. And lots of the work that I do at Covenant House, I lean hard on them. In fact, they avoid me now because I suck the marrow right out of their bones. Those New York Yankees are giving me tickets every single time that I see that man. And we get free tickets to all of Al's stuff. And they're both loaded, so they can, trust me, they can afford it. But they're generous of heart, beautiful men, and helped me figure my way through this place. So anyway, back to Covenant House. I lost my way. It was a crushing experience, and I felt so outmatched by poverty and violence and abuse and neglect, and by the absence of everything that had made sense to me. And this notion of a providential God is a very challenging notion when it's impossible to see light in the life of young people. So Benny, first kid I meet, I bounced right out of law school, September 7th, 1992, and they tell me that there is a young person who needs my legal help. And you know, the last thing that she needed at that moment was a lawyer. She eventually needed one, but she reeked of urine. She was starving. She had been scavenging for food for a week and a half at the Port Authority at JFK Terminal in New York City. It's probably very hard to imagine today that a teenager could be living in an airport terminal, especially post 9/11, but this is pre 9/11. And there were lots of homeless folks who made their way trying to survive at the bus terminals and at the airport stations, and it took the Port Authority police about a week and a half to figure out that there was a teenager who kept pulling food out of the trash at the Nathan's, and she was wearing the same clothes she'd been wearing, but she smelled and something seemed really wrong with her. And when they talked to her, they recognized that she was homeless, and they brought her to Covenant House. That first conversation with her was terrible, in part because she was a shell of a person. She cradled herself, and I can't remember her looking up or me even seeing the color of her eyes for most of the interview. When she did look up, I recognized that her eyes were bloodshot and tears were just streaming down her face. She cradled herself, she rocked back and forth. And she told a story of losing her mother before she was a teenager. Her father had never been on the scene. And she came into the custody of her mother's sister, disenrolled her from school, and essentially trafficked her, made her a domestic servant to their family, a slave, unable to leave the house, and then put her up for sale, if you will, for a local neighbor who serially raped her. And his friends did as well, less frequently, but as well. And this was her experience of intimacy, and it was her adolescence. Age 13, age 14, age 15, age 16, age 17, she escapes. And she has, as you could guess, she has a set of legal issues. She shows up at this shelter, which is a scary thing. I mean, I don't know if any of you have ever been at the Covenant House in New York. Covenant House is here in the city, and we work in 6 countries. And in the United States, we're in several dozen cities doing outreach work and also providing shelter to homeless teenagers. But the one in New York is foreboding. It's a huge building, which we got for free a long time ago. And it's a scary place for kids to come. And so she walks in there and she's feeling very nervous. And to make a long story short, she needs help figuring out how to participate in the prosecution of her aunt and of the boys who were then young men who were raping her. And then also to find her way forward, because this was a kid who hadn't been in school in years, and there weren't a lot of public high schools that were eager to take an almost 18-year-old and introduce her into an 8th grade program or a 9th grade program and help her matriculate. So she was just so lost in so many ways. So we found our way together. I wasn't especially helpful to her, though I did the best I could. Law school, if any of you are thinking about law school, here's some unsolicited advice. It filled me with a sense of arrogance that I, with the virtue of this JD, had all the tools that I needed to save the world. And the truth is, and Todd and I were talking about this earlier, that a lot of times people's issues are much bigger than the tool set that we bring. And I didn't have the confidence in myself or the humility to understand that she had many, many deeper issues than I could fix in her life. We found our way together, and we lost touch after about a year and a half, and her legal issues had been resolved. Her aunt went to jail, her aunt's husband went to jail, and 2 of those young men went to jail. I see her at Rachel's restaurant, 43rd Street, 2-3 years later. And she's taller than me, which I don't think I recall. And she is beaming, she's radiant. She's wearing a bright blue waitress uniform with a white apron, and she's smiling, and she flings her arms open and gives me a big hug. How are you? I'm fine, how are you? And she tells me that she's working at the restaurant during the day because she is going to nursing school at night. And she's met a boy who she says loves her in the right way. He goes on to become her husband. They have 3 children. And she says that she's decided that she's going to give her life to working in a NICU-PICU unit with very sick babies. And we hug, I have lunch, I leave and I walk back to the shelter, and I think to myself, and this is not an epistemological or rhetorical question, I concretely think to myself, how does someone go from losing their mother and their father, from being serially raped through their adolescence, from being betrayed by their only birth relatives on the planet? How do they go from that to deciding within a few short years to give their lives to helping other people's sick children. How does that happen? I mean, I really want to know how that happens. What is that about? What are the 1,000 moments of grace, intentional or inexplicable, that move somebody from a place of brokenness to a place of healing? And those questions never left me. I stayed with Covenant House for 10 years before I left Covenant House, and worked for 7 years for a couple of governors in New Jersey, and then at the United Nations. I came back 4 years ago to Covenant House. But those questions never left me, and all that left me was the parting of the clouds, that solar eclipse that was my time at Covenant House during those first 2 years, burying kids who were infected by selfish, self-absorbed Johns, watching kids get time and time again hurt by poverty and violence and gangs, and watching kids make terrible decisions to go back to the Bloods or the Crips or the Mara 18 instead of deciding to finish high school or go to college or stick with their job or take care of themselves. But those clouds parted because I was able to see the other side of the bridge. I was able to see, which is very hard to see in a year at Covenant House because it's a place of hurt, but it was possible to see the grace of God in the life of a hurting kid. It was possible to see a miraculous transformation that really defies all of our expectations. And I find myself, to be really honest with you, I find myself experiencing sort of a microcosm of that this week, because the relentless, when I woke up on Tuesday morning, I saw the picture of little Martin Richard, and he was in his first communion. He was in his first communion outfit, and I heard the story of him running to the finish line in the Boston Marathon to congratulate his dad, Bill, then returning to his mom and sister and being blown up. It was, it was a punch to the gut, the likes of which I can only imagine what his family and friends must be experiencing. And then this relentless 24-hour news coverage about the loss of Crystal and the loss of Zoo, and thinking about all of the suffering and the fear and the dread that connects to that. I find myself having to work hard, as I imagine some of you are also having to work hard, to pay attention to the stories of the first responders and the kindness, the doctor who crossed the finish line and rushed to the hospital to perform 8 hours of surgery. I've run a marathon, which I know you will find hard to believe, but I've run a marathon, and I dry heaved for an hour after I crossed the finish line. The thought that you would somehow regenerate and focus and then perform 8 hours of surgery to save the lives of people who desperately needed you to do that, or the hundreds of Bostonians who lined up to donate blood. I mean, you know the stories, right? But the stories, I don't mean to be saccharine or sentimental about this. This is the opposite of what I intend. I mean to say that's the real story. The real story is the light and the kindness and the innate nature of God's grace and our human spirit. But it's, we stare sometimes at the horrific. And I did that at Covenant House. I got lost into it. And that's a place of darkness. So I find myself working very hard this week to focus not on trying to make sense of how someone could anonymously blow up little Martin and try to rationalize that or understand that. I try instead to think about the beautiful, heroic, kind ways that people responded to tragedy and what that means for all of us as a community of love. And this, I think, is the invitation of Covenant House. But I wanted to tell these stories in a more concrete way than a set of anecdotes. So I knew a reporter from the New York Times who won a Pulitzer Prize, and she had covered some of the work that I had done when I worked in New Jersey government, and she had volunteered at Covenant House before she began her very prestigious career in public reporting. And so we had lunch after I came back to Covenant House, and we started talking, and she's here tonight, Tina Kelly. We got this idea. Tina, stand up for a second so folks see who you are. It's as close as I'm ever going to get to a Pulitzer Prize. And so we had a conversation about finding extraordinary stories of young people all across the United States and Canada who had moved from a place of homelessness to hope. And so we met in this journey of reporting that we did over 3 years that led to the publication of Almost Home. We met Polly Robbins. And Polly Robbins, from the time that he can remember, was told that he was abandoned in a shed by a mother who didn't want him. He was adopted by a family, a very poor family, poor in many ways, in Alaska. And his father perniciously beat the daylights out of his mother and shrouded that home in violence. This is his adoptive father. For most of his young life, Polly told us the story of being a tyke and having his father, during one of his flare-ups, bring a gun out. And he didn't point the gun at Polly, and he didn't point the gun at Polly's mom. He put the barrel in his mouth, and he put Polly's finger, at the age of 6, on the trigger, and said, "Go ahead, do it. Go ahead and kill me." And that typifies the stress and the anxiety that this kid grew up with. His mother eventually became increasingly fragile. She recalled to us that she threw up almost every day of their married life, and slowly became drug addict by the pills that she used to numb her sense of what was happening in her life. One day, his dad goes up on the slope. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Alaska, but it's not uncommon that people will go and do drilling work and leave home for a stint of time, and then come back for a stint of time. His dad went away on the slope. Mom came into their trailer and said, "I have a friend who's going to come and stay with us." This is shortly before his 14th birthday and shortly before Christmas. And she said, "I met him on the internet, but you don't have to call him Dad." I was like, "Don't worry, I'm not going to call him Dad. Who is he?" And within a matter of days, this man showed up, and he was sleeping in Mom's bed, and his mom seemed happy, and Polly kept thinking to himself, "My father is coming back here. How is this going to make sense?" But before his father came back, news broke that this man, who had shown up in their lives, had to return to Canada, where he was from, because his wife, having learned that he had fled to Alaska to be with his internet girlfriend, killed herself, and his children had been taken into the Canadian foster care system. So he said, "I'm leaving," and Polly's mom sat him down and said, "I'm going with him. And you can't come with him because you don't have status. So you're going to stay with some friends here in Alaska, and I'll send for you." And so with that, his mom split, and he left to live with some of her friends, and he began, in this his 8th grade year, a season of freedom, exploration, lawlessness, restlessness, anxiety, and anger. And he did what I think a lot of 13-year-olds would do. He stopped going to school. He started hanging with the wrong crowd. He started using drugs. His grades went, he was the all-star quarterback for the local football team, and his grades were very good. And he went from that experience, even in a family that was shrouded in violence and had been combustible from the get-go, he went from that experience to being on his own and experimenting, perhaps even at that young age, becoming addicted to drugs, and then bouncing from place to place to place to place to place. In the story that he told us, he began what was, 5 years of bouncing from residential treatment center to group home to Mom's house, to Dad's house, where Dad would beat the crap out of him, to psychiatric hospital, to shelter. And he also found his way into, the Arctic rave scene, and became a member of this community of all-night dance party enthusiasts who were turned on by the electronic wizardry of the DJ who's, created this, pulsating sound that the kids partied to all night, and he became part of a subset culture of ex-addicts. He was using drugs a lot. I don't know if any of you know much about ecstasy. I certainly hope that you don't, or not to stay away from it, but it heightens the heart rate, and that's especially dangerous for kids in the Arctic North who are dancing all night, and their heart rate, moves at the 160, 170, and then you go outside and it's 10 degrees and causes, sadly enough, death and significant illness in Alaska. This kid was lost, so he shows up at Covenant House. Some people think Covenant House, they think, the kids come in the front door of Covenant House and they're rescued. And as if there's some talismanic transformational experience that occurs because a young person walks in the front door of Covenant House. That's not it. There's no fairiness. It's a movement of love. We're a movement of love. And there are kids who aren't ready to believe that about themselves. And that was certainly true of Polly. So Polly bounced in, and he had the misfortune, he thought, of being assigned to the oldest and crankiest counselor in intake, Miss Miller. They called her Miss Military. Her husband had left her after many years of marriage. They had moved to Alaska because of his military career, and she was one of the few African-American faces in Alaska. In fact, very few African-Americans in Alaska, and she was perhaps the only employee at the time who was African-American. And the city's overwhelmingly white, and of course there's a significant percentage, even more now, of Native Alaskan children. She didn't look like anybody else, she didn't act like anybody else, she didn't sweet talk or purr, and she was onto this kid's number right away. Polly, so handsome, so charismatic. This kid could charm, what's the expression I'm bad at this? He could charm a dog off a meat truck. I'm not so bad, okay, he could charm a dog off a meat truck. And this kid was too charming and too handsome for his own good. And she didn't buy into any of that. Because what led others to coddle and cuddle and tell him, it's okay, you don't have to go to school, don't worry, it's terrible what your folks are doing to you. She knew that he needed an invitation to embrace the great promise of his life. But he bounced in and out of Covenant House 11 times because he got angry that she kept saying, you gotta go back to school. You have to get a job. And so he would come into Covenant House and he'd try to regenerate. He'd warm up, he'd fill his belly, he'd detox off of whatever pills he was using at the time. And then when the lure of the streets pulled him back out there, whether it was the rave party scene or it was gang life or it was just freedom, it was just freedom. I don't have to be in bed at 10 o'clock. I'm not walking into your shelter at 9 p.m. at night. I'll stay up as late as I want. When that message became louder, he'd split. And his life just kept spiraling downward. And he got arrested in a very significant ecstasy bust where he was selling an especially large number of pills. He was, without any sense of a place in the world. He felt like his mother had left him. In fact, his last experience with mom was finding himself at her wedding to this new boyfriend in Canada. I promise you this is true. If you don't trust me, you have to trust the reporter. They're married in the very spot with the stain on the rug from the blood of the woman who had killed herself the year before in that spot. That's where they were married. There he was. Make a picture. There he is at the wedding, looking in wonder at what is happening in my life. Who are these adults who are supposed to be family to me? And he kept hearing the exasperated, frustrated, insistent voice of Miss Mildred. Kids respond to different things. There's no one way to work with a young person. Sometimes it's a carrot, sometimes it's a stick. And young people have different levels of trauma that they've experienced. Some young people live their whole lives in foster care and don't even understand what it means to have a stable family setting. And others have experienced just a short stint on the streets, and so you can connect them in a faster way to stability. But this kid was lost. I mean, this kid had been on the streets for so long, and he'd been using drugs for so long, and he'd bounced from so many places, and there were no adults in his life who had trained him to trust them, that he hated her and resisted every single insistent word that she uttered, until one day, freezing in that Arctic cold, having listened to the voices of the ravers and the gangs and the older kids using drugs and his family members and his own voice, it was her voice that played in his head. The voice saying, there's more for you than this. Get yourself into school. And all of her intuition about him was right. It was the first time without any prep, this kid tried to pass the GED, which is a very hard test. We sometimes talk derisively about general equivalency diplomas, but if any of you have ever tried to take a GED, it's a really hard test. I would be failing the math section hard. he passed it, and he passed it with flying colors. And she knew that there was more going on with this kid than anyone had expected. And he slowly but surely decided to get real about his life. Now that didn't happen right away. And one of the most challenging parts of our Covenant House experience is that we had to watch him walk out the door 10 times and feeling like we'd blown it. We had to watch him get arrested and get institutionalized and get sicker and more addicted and feel like we'd blown it. But eventually, when this providential, and trust me, Mildred is such a hard person. You'd never believe that the grace of God would be acting through so formal and demanding a voice as Mildred. But, you know, God works in interesting ways. And this kid flourished and quickly realized that kickboxing was his thing, poetry was his thing. He became, you know, the big man on campus, if you will, at Covenant House. He was leading a lot of poetry raps. And within a couple of years, he became the kickboxing champion of Alaska. And then eventually recognized that he had an opportunity to pay back and threw a very special dinner for the young people at Covenant House. And in what turned out to be a blizzard, he escorted them all to the meal and treated them in the restaurant that he was working at to a feast. And he looked out in that audience and he saw, you know, these dozens and dozens of homeless kids, and he saw his own face. Because he still remembered that birth mother who gave him away once upon a time, and he wondered what that was about. And he had, since his experience of homelessness, uncovered and received a letter that his birth mother had handed off, in which she pledged loyalty and love to him. And he wondered, who gave me away, and why did she do that? And why did these people who adopt me treat me this way? And he saw himself in the faces of those young people. What he didn't know, I'm not going to give away too much here, but what he didn't know was that one day, not very long after that, he would be buying supplies at the grocery store for the restaurant. And that the cashier he was flirting with at the restaurant, I told you he was charismatic and very good looking, and he was just, this kid is like an instinctual, he's not a kid anymore actually, he's grown up, so I've got to stop talking about him as if he isn't grown up because he's a wonderful young man now. But at the time, he was just, a non-stop flirt. And he couldn't help but flirt with this woman, and he didn't realize that she was the sister of his birth mother, and that she would help her sister in short order identify him, and that Paulie's birth mother would reach out to him and tell her story, and invite Tina to cover their reunion live in a really special and miraculous interaction that has changed both of their lives and lead him forward. And I don't want to leave you with the thought that this all happened because of Covenant House, because I don't think of Covenant House as a building, though the buildings are the places where we take care of kids. I want to leave you with the thought that it was a community of people inside and outside of Covenant House who loved this kid and pulled for this kid, who helped him move forward, and that there were big things and small things that people did to game-changing kids' lives. One of the things that people do at our shelters is they show up once a month with a birthday cake to celebrate the birthdays of homeless teenagers. This is going to shock you as it did me, but there are buildings filled with homeless teenagers in our Covenant Houses who have never had happy birthday sung to them. How did I find that out? Because it wasn't intuitive at all. When kids pointed to the sign on the wall that says, "Happy birthday Keisha, happy birthday Mary, happy birthday Donald," and they said, "Hey, can I have that and put that up in my room?" And I'd say, sure, it's construction paper, it's a marker, it took somebody 30 seconds to write that and maybe draw a bad butterfly or a couple of, balloons. Because I've never had a birthday party and I'd like to remember this. And that happens at Covenant Houses from Los Angeles, Hollywood, Oakland, all the way to here, Washington, D.C., New York, Anchorage, to Fort Lauderdale, and Houston, and New Orleans, and Atlanta, and Detroit, and St. Louis. It happens all across the country, young people who have never had happy birthday sung to them. And there are volunteers who show up at the shelter, and they bake a cake. If you're like me, that is a big deal, right? I would actually injure someone's recollection of their birthday if I shared a cake with them, but some of you may be talented in the kitchen. And they provide oxygen for this young person. They provide a sense of purpose and of hope. And you know, when I was at Catholic University, I stumbled, right, as I shared with you, I stumbled through my first year. And it was the kindness of friends, one of whom is here tonight, and professors, one of whom is here tonight, who pulled me forward in intentional and unintentional ways. And one of the things that I long for us all to be more conscious of is how the things that we say and the generosity of spirit that we offer to the world can, in ways that we don't anticipate, ripple out and help other people forward. So when I was feeling really low here and I really wanted to leave, I can vividly recall somebody in the campus ministry house saying to me just the right thing that made me feel better about my experience here. And while that's not anything like the suffering of young people at Covenant House, it's not wholly different either, because there are kids at Covenant House, kids who are being trafficked, kids who are trying to get out of gangs, kids whose only experience in families, foster care, group homes, who deeply need to feel love in the world. And love's got to be a safe thing that we're okay saying. You know, sometimes when we get into the experience of the institution, right, so we work at Covenant House and we provide services, we forget that that's not what we're about. We're a community of love. The miracle of God's providence, which is a real thing. It's a real thing. You may be studying it. You may be very interested in stories of our faith tradition over time and how that's been revealed to us. But I'm telling you, God's providence is a real thing. And it really opens kids' hearts to healing. Paulie is who he is today. Happy, still too handsome, still too charismatic, much less flirtatious young man, having his first child, and joyfully so, because of God's providence in his life. And this was true, too, for Muriel, who, you know, before she was 12 years old, or before she was 13 years old, she was hooked on coke, heroin, X. She had been essentially sent from her family back to the Philippines, where she was originally adopted from, because they were so frustrated with her. When she showed back up in the United States, her adolescence was filled with running away, with trying to make sense of her life, and ultimately she was trafficked in the downtown east in Vancouver. You know, this experience of trafficking is bigger than we think. In the United States, the FBI estimates that last year 100,000 children, 80% of them U.S. citizens, were commercially sexually exploited, which means in Las Vegas alone, police in 2007 arrested more than 300 children under the age of 13 who participated in commercial sexual activity. It's a much bigger experience of exploitation than we can digest, and those numbers don't make sense to us in the world, right? Because that's not our experience. Like, if I asked you right now, how many of you know kids who were trafficked? I am hoping the vast most of you would say, I don't know anybody. So this narrative doesn't make sense in our lives. We don't know how to make sense of the fact that there could be 100,000 children in the United States who are being bought and sold. Well, this is true in Canada. It's very true in Canada. And while we benefit at Covenant House from having a tenacious, tough love, well-respected anti-human trafficking advocate, Sister Nancy Brown, who just won Canada's Order of British Columbia, which is the province's highest order for her work, and I'll take it to well deserved, because this woman has taken on the Hells Angels. She's taken on, this woman cleared the way if you are in front of Sister Nancy, because you had better be on the side of light, because she is a force to be reckoned with. And she was there for Muriel, but Muriel decided that the drugs and the freedom were a better recipe in her life, especially because although she was now advanced in her time at Covenant House, she was an older teenager, she had been, you know, hooked on drugs, and her metabolism was just fixed on that for so long. So she leaves Covenant House. All she can remember, Muriel is as she splits, and it might have been Sister Nancy, or it might have been her caseworker, or a doctor, or the maid, or a nurse, or the maintenance guy. Somebody said to her, as she was leaving, "You're better than this. You're better than this." This kid goes back to the streets. The pimps hop her up on Red Bull. They give her all the drugs she wants. And then we write about this in the book. She remembers, evenings with these self-absorbed, lost, lonely men who commodify their beauty and, use them, sometimes hurt them, buy them, and then split and go back to their wives or girlfriends or, side bands. The District Attorney of New York just busted up a trafficking ring in the city, and the Johns are, Titans of Wall Street, advertising executives, this bifurcation of our spirit, which is just so present when you buy and sell people. So this kid sees her friends getting hurt, she sees herself getting hurt, and she's beautiful, she's lovely, she's young, she's Asian, she is making a mint for the pimps. None of this money is coming to her, none of this money. I don't know if you have much experience with human trafficking survivors, but this money all goes to the gangs, the pimps, the cartels. None of this goes to the young people, except maybe the occasional nice outfit that they quickly have to lose in order to be serially raped. And with children, it's rape. I'm not even having a conversation with you about adults. I'm talking about children. She was that. But she remembers, in her head one night, this symphony of voices, kind of the voice she cannot even pinpoint. Someone saying, "You're better than this. You're better than this." It's a life raft. It tethers her home. Tina and I reported the book together, but Tina did all the recording of this, and I used to say to Tina, how could this be? Like, how could this be the voice that saves this kid, that brings her home, that takes her away from pimp after pimp after pimp, and there were 3 of them, gets her back inside Covenants? How could she not know who said that to her? And Tina said, one, as a seasoned reporter, she goes, well, one, that's the truth, she doesn't. But 2, isn't that beautiful? That could be any of us. Any of us could be the voice saying to young people, there's more for you. You're better than this. And it brought her back to safety. And, her ultimate aspiration, now she's years away from her trafficking experience, is to be an advocate for other human trafficking survivors. And that really, look, there's 2 things we have to do here, or maybe 3 things we have to do here. We have to get much more serious about identifying and prosecuting pimps and Johns, because I'm just tired of kids who get prostituted being arrested, and the pimps and Johns are anonymous to us. I think that that's a mistake, and it's exciting to see the District Attorney in New York City and the Attorney General in New Jersey and the Attorney General in Michigan, 6 successful prosecutions in the last 2 years, and other Attorneys General getting really intentional about prosecuting pimps and Johns, because it shouldn't be a safe thing to buy and sell kids. Secondly, we have to create some, and this is bigger than DAs and prosecutors and attorneys general, we have to create a social taboo in our culture around buying and selling children. If we're half as successful in creating a taboo around the buying and selling of children as we are around smoking, we could really move the dial on human trafficking. God forbid anybody puffs on a cigarette, but go ahead and buy or sell a kid. There's a real loss here in our culture around this conversation. Oh, someone's coming off. I said the wrong thing. The ice cream is waiting. I'm almost done, I promise.
There was a timer.
Done. All right, well, I don't need this. And I'm almost done. So, one of the things I'd like to invite you all to do is thinking about how you talk on this campus around human trafficking and the buying and selling of boys and girls. Without trying to sound too didactic and too preachy,
struggled with drug addiction, Covenant House in New York, struggled with drug addiction. And she came into Covenant House, and it was a story very similar to a lot of stories we've heard, where this kid's family fell apart, she was getting abused on the street, she fallen in with the wrong crowd, and she was getting prostituted. And she came into Covenant House, and she cleaned herself up. But the gang that she had stopped working for was furious. And, you know, goes in, thanks. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'm okay. I think I'm okay. And honestly, they don't want you to give me a mic. They want this to be over. So, they were furious that she split. And if you go to almost any Covenant House in any big city where we work, the pimps circle the block, where they have places where they camp out because they want to see these vulnerable, familyless kids walk out of the shelter, and they want to start to work them, right? So if you go to the Port Authority in New York, you're at the bus terminal, you know, you see the 13-year-old, 14-year-old kid doing this, and then you'll just see, you know, the people move in and start to recruit. And sometimes it's other young people, and sometimes it's women, you know, acting maternally. Often it's a guy, you know, and the boyfriend, and it's the boyfriend ethos. Come on, baby, I'll take care of you. You'll be okay tonight. Come on, come with me, or I'll give you some shelter. And before you know it, they're hopped up on drugs, and they're being raped. So this essentially was the life that April had escaped from. But she struggled with drug addiction. I don't know if any of you have experienced drug addiction, but it is just a punishing and debilitating illness, and you know, your body can crave that experience of high, even months after and sometimes years after recovery, especially for adolescents. So the long story short is, she in August I think, right? Yeah, she in August goes missing from the shelter. And we don't know where, and you know, her drug counselor doesn't know where she is, her social worker doesn't know where she is, and the staff are wondering, where is this kid? Where is this kid? And we received a package the next day at the church parking lot across the street at 41st and 10th. And it was her naked dead body wrapped up. A message from the gang to us. Now, how many of you had heard that a teenager had been murdered and her body dropped 2 blocks from the heart of Times Square, a block from, you know, the Disney musical Newsies? How many of you had heard that story? No New York Post coverage, no New York Times coverage, no New York Daily News coverage, and the police worked really hard to try to not make it be a big thing. And I think it's in part because homeless kids just don't rape. Nobody missed this kid. Sure, her funeral was attended, as all of our kids' funerals are attended, by a pageant of other homeless young people who love them and mourn them. The point of the story is that the stakes are going to be high, and kids are going to lose their lives. And if we don't decide that enough is enough, and that human dignity requires more than sort of an academic commitment to being pro-life, or an academic commitment to standing up for justice for the poor, wrong way. You don't fit in. We get the privilege of creating a new tape in their head so that they can start hearing you're extraordinary in God's eyes and you're extraordinary in our eyes. And when young people start to believe that, just like think about yourself, right? If you wake up in the morning and all you hear is terrible things about yourself, you're stupid, you're late for class, you're dumb, you got F on your assignment, your friends hate you, you're lying, you're drunk last night, you act like an idiot, you don't. If that is an avalanche of negativity, by the end of the day, you're not feeling good about yourself. And if that's all you hear over and over and over and over again, you don't want to be. You don't want to be. It's not that there's not a place for you in the world. You don't want to be in the world because you're broken. We can play a different tape for those young people. So that they start, wow, you're a great poet. You're an amazing athlete. What a great runner. I ran the New York City half marathon. There goes with the exaggeration. Half marathon 3 weeks ago with 4 Covenant House kids. Every one of them wept at the finish line. And 3 of them wept because they never got a trophy or medal before. My kids nowadays, my oldest son is your age, and then they go all the way down to 8. We got more trophies in our house from every extracurricular, recreational program. I had to create a room for trophies and medals and ribbons, and it's insane. These kids never had that. Never had that. They had to run 13.1 miles in 40-degree weather in a dark Manhattan afternoon with only friends, right? No family, only friends cheering for them in order to get their first medal. But boy, that medal, that sucker is framed on their wall. There's kids still wearing it. The release was 3 weeks ago. There's kids still wearing this because it's an invitation for a new tape to play in their minds. Help marginalized, disenfranchised, hurting people get a different tape to play in their mind. You figure out who that is. It could be men and women in a homeless shelter. It could be undocumented persons. It could be the elderly languishing in nursing homes. You need a kind spoken word to them. It could be the sick at our area hospitals. It could be your fellow students who've lost a parent this year or a grandparent. It could be you. Help folks play a different tape in their mind. If you decide to do it at Covenant House, we have a program which invites young people who graduate from college to spend a year with us called the Faith Community. This is what my then girlfriend, Claire, did. She graduated from here. She went to Covenant House, New Orleans, and she volunteered for a year. And I didn't know much about Covenant House back then, but I was really resentful that it sucked my girlfriend away from Washington, D.C. and brought her back to Louisiana. And I wasn't too happy. And then I went down there and I saw the ways in which the kids inhabited her heart, and the ways in which she grew spiritually, and the ways in which she became wiser. And I coveted it. And I knew that it was going to be the work of my life and now ultimately the work of our lives. I wish that for you. It may be Covenant House. It may be that you decide to join our work and help change kids' lives. But whatever it is, I wish for you the bliss that has every day in my experience at Covenant House. It started here, and it's not the bliss of being over. God bless you all. I'm going to play a little tape. Signing books outside. So anybody have any questions? There's Haagen-Dazs that's like 30 seconds away. The first hand that goes up. Sister? Yeah.
How long do the children stay at Covenant House?
Yeah. Some will stay with us for 2 years, and some will stay with us for 2 nights. It's a program that's rooted in choice. So nobody ever has to be a Covenant Covenant House International, which is the way we work, is every site has a responsibility to raise about half their budget, and then my team in New York raises the other half. We have to raise about $150 million a year, and of the $70 million that we have to raise in New York, that's entirely private. And if you need proof of the providence of God, you should sit in our mailroom when every day 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people from across the United States send checks of $5 and $10 and $20 because they want to help a homeless kid they've never met. You already know where I stand, but if I ever get weak, it's, the providence of God is so real and helps us stay alive. We're not a charity that, there are some days I wish we were getting a big government check, but we don't. Nothing wrong with a big government check, though. I wouldn't mind a big government check, trust me. Just not getting it. Okay, yeah. No, well, there is the street outreach office is at North Capitol, but I think that most of the operations now are in Anacostia, right, at a southeast on Mississippi Avenue. But I think that there are teams from Catholic Youth that go out very regularly and do days of service. And there's a guy here on campus named Johnny McCarthy, who I think is graduating, but he tends to organize this. And he's graduating, so we'll need a new group of young people to organize the Saturday trip to Covenant House. And it's everything. Some folks might not be comfortable talking to a homeless teenager. I get that. I wasn't that comfortable at first. So it's cool. Go in the clothing room in full jeans. We got a whole bunch of kids who come in and they don't have any clothing. You could turn a pile of dirty jeans into a boutique, so that kid feels special. Like they're going into this room, and it's not like, here, take these secondhand dirty jeans, but they're clean and they're hung up, and it's kind of cool. We try to make kids feel special. And one of the ways we do that is with our clothing room. And I can tell you the Covenant House is where we don't do it. We mourn it. We wish we had more volunteers who could come in, so you could do that. You could help us with the grounds. We could work with the kids. Whatever interests you. There's a house full of homeless young people, your age and a little younger, a couple miles from you. Okay. Thank you all so much. I want to share with you very quickly, this is a very fast video, a new thing we're doing at Covenant House. We, 2 years ago, I say we, this wasn't my idea, we 2 years ago had this idea, what if we had a sleep out across the United States and had celebrities, athletes, CEOs from across the country sleep out for one night in a dozen cities and raise awareness about youth homelessness. And that event, which featured, lots of famous people in more than a dozen cities in 6 countries, raised $3 million last year, which we never expected to. People went up, they go on a portal, they asked their friends, hey, will you give me $5 if I sleep out? I made the mistake